Welcome back. Let's talk about the crash course video about Plato and Aristotle, which outlined Aristotle's views on the nature of the universe, that is, his cosmology, and also his views about souls. One thing that's missing from that video is an explanation of how these two sets of ideas are related, and that's really important for our purposes. Start with Aristotle's physics. Even if you knew nothing about Aristotle, you could have guessed his views about the basic stuff in the world. If I told you that he thought there were 4 elements, you would have quickly guessed that they were earth, air, fire, and water. I could have thrown you off by telling you that there were 5 elements rather than 4, because maybe you hadn't heard of the 5th element that the stars are made of, the ether. But you definitely would have guessed the 4 terrestrial elements, that is, the ones that are found here on Earth. The video also emphasizes 2 other aspects of Aristotle's theory of the elements. First, each element has its own distinctive motion. For the ether, Aristotle agrees with Plato that it moves in perfect circles, forming the invisible crystalline spheres that the stars are embedded in, and thereby explaining the stars' motion across the night sky. The terrestrial elements, in contrast, naturally move in straight lines, toward the center of the universe for Earth, and less vigorously so for water, toward the outside of the universe for fire, and less vigorously so for air. Second, the ordinary state of the universe that we find is one of mixture. We don't often encounter pure forms of the elements, but mixtures of them. Aristotle, like Democritus, is an atomist, but the idea of atomic and molecular bonding is still many centuries away. The basic way to make new things is by mixing materials together and then shaping them. So each thing consists of both a mixture of elements and also its shape. That is, everything has both substance and form. For Plato, the forms of things have their own kind of existence, but that's another story that we'll touch on later. For Aristotle, the form of a thing exists within it. This is easiest to picture if we think about taking dough or clay and making it into bread or into a brick. We have a mixture and we give it a distinctive shape. The form of a thing is then simply its shape, at least as far as geometric form. Now, Aristotle has the same views on how babies are made as well. He thinks the female provides the substance out of which the baby will be made, and the male sperm provides the form of the baby. But now a question arises. Think about a creature that's just died. It consists of the same substance in the same shape that just a moment ago was alive. Yet it's not alive. So what's missing? This is where souls come in. Souls are the forms of living things. Souls are the answer to how living things can have complicated natural motions that are not just additive mixtures of the natural movements of the substances of which they're made. So let's look at a few passages from Aristotle's De Anima together. Start with Book 2, in the middle of this page. Just kidding, we'll read it in English, but I wanted to remind you that Aristotle wrote in ancient Greek, so we're reading his work in translation. First, in the beginning of Book 2, Aristotle reminds us of his general metaphysical framework. He says, "Now there is one class of existent things which we call substance, including, under the term, firstly, matter, which in itself is not this or that, secondly, shape or form, in virtue of which the term this or that is at once applied, and thirdly, the whole made up of matter and form." Soon after, we get Aristotle's big proposal. Of natural bodies, some possess life and some do not, where by life we mean the power of self-nourishment and of independent growth and decay. It must follow then that soul is substance in the sense that it is the form of the natural body having in it the capacity of life. Souls are the forms of living things. But what is life? Aristotle thinks there are many features of things that we count as being alive. But the term life is used in various senses, and if life is present in but a single one of these senses, we speak of a thing as living. Thus, there is intellect, sensation, motion from place to place and rest, the motion concerned with nutrition, and further, decay and growth. The simplest kind of movement that needs explaining is growth and decay. Living things take in nutrition and grow. So Aristotle postulates that there must be a nutritive soul. Because even plants have this kind of motion, it's sometimes called the vegetative soul. The next kind of movement that needs explaining is locomotion and sensation. Moving around requires perception so you don't run into things, but Aristotle thinks even animals that don't move around will have sensation and appetites. He's thinking of things that attach themselves in one spot, like mussels or barnacles. Plants don't do this, or so Aristotle thought, but animals do. So Aristotle thinks there must be a sensing soul that's had by animals and not plants, and that enables movement in those things that have it. Finally, the third piece that only humans have is the intellect or rational soul. Of the powers of soul mentioned above, namely those of vital nutrition, appetency, sensation, locomotion, and understanding, some living things, as we remarked, possess all, others some, others only one. Plants possess the nutritive faculty only. Other things, along with this, have sensation. And if sensation, then also appetency, where implied under appetency, we include desire, anger, and wish. But all animals have at least one sense, touch. And where sensation is found, there is pleasure and pain, and that which causes pleasure and pain. And where these are, there is also desire. Desire being appetite for what is pleasurable. Some have, in addition, the power of locomotion. Others, that is to say man and any other species like man, or possibly superior to him, have also the thinking faculty and intellect. Aristotle famously says that we are rational animals. So we have all the capacities of animals, but also the capacity for reason. It's not a simple matter to line up Aristotle's view with the ancient Egyptian view we talked about before, but there are certainly some resemblances. For Aristotle, we have the form of the body, and also the forms, that is souls, that are responsible for the distinctive features of life: growth, sensation, movement, thought, and reason. One difference is that these were separate objects or entities on the Egyptian view, and some could survive without the others. In contrast, although Aristotle discusses separating parts of souls, he's ambivalent about whether there are really three souls or just three aspects of one soul. And he's clear that the forms of things do not exist independently of the things that they inform. This is the so-called hylomorphic theory of forms. Now, in closing, I want to highlight two features of Aristotle's way of doing philosophy, one of which we'll maintain, and the other of which we'll see being rejected by later philosophers and scientists. The first part, which we'll hold on to, is the idea that the reason to postulate forms or souls or anything else is in order to explain the world around us. Aristotle doesn't believe there are forms just because Plato did or because they're part of his religion. He thinks the justification for positing forms in general, and souls specifically, is that they help us explain certain phenomena in the world, in particular to explain the motions of things. It's because Earth is the kind of stuff it is, that is, has the form it does, that it tries to get to the center of the universe. And that's why we find the Earth at the center of the universe, why we observe the sun orbiting the Earth, and why the Earth is a sphere. It's because an acorn is a plant, and moreover, the kind of plant that it grows into an oak tree rather than into an animal like a bear. The second part of Aristotle's view, which we'll see get rejected by later philosophers and scientists, is the kind of explanation that Aristotle relies on. According to Aristotle, the forms of things make them what they are, and Aristotle thinks that each kind of thing has its own reasons for being. We explain how things are and how they move by identifying their purposes, that which they're for, which he called their telos, or ends. Earth moves towards the center of the universe because that's its purpose. That's what it's supposed to do. An acorn grows into an oak tree because that's what it's supposed to do. That's its goal. That's what it is for an acorn to flourish. If I grew into an oak tree, that would be bad for me, because I'm the kind of thing that has a different goal, a different kind of being, and a different good life. Being a tree is bad for things with intellect, but good for acorns. This kind of explanation in terms of goals or purposes is widely rejected when it comes to natural phenomena outside of psychology. People can have goals and purposes, but not planets or acorns. So most philosophers and scientists no longer think that we can take purposes or telos as basic features of the world. If we want to attribute purposes or functions to things, we need to explain how those purposes come to be. And later we'll see some theorists who think they can, indeed, explain how we get natural purposes and goals, and how we can use them to explain mental phenomena. But although there will be certain similarities between their views and Aristotle's view, we should definitely remember their view is not literally his view. Aristotle thought it was just a basic fact about fire that it tries to get to the outside of the universe. That fact has no further explanation, and the reason to believe it is that it helps to explain the experience we have with fire and fire-related observations that we make.